Insurance Institute for Highway Safety estimates that nationally we average 200 deaths per year from wildlife vehicle collisions. And in New York State alone, from 2014 to 2023, we've suffered 55 deaths.
On any given day in New York, animals are vulnerable to being struck by vehicles on our roadways, and these collisions aren't just dangerous for wildlife.
And on today's episode of the DOT POD, we're talking about how the New York State Department of Transportation is ensuring safe passage for wildlife with the safety of nature and humans in mind.
The New York State Department of Transportation presents the DOT POD.
And welcome into the DOT POD. I'm Josh Heller.
And I'm Anya Cardos.
And we are delighted to have you joining us. Well, today we're delving into structures known as wildlife crossings, and we're chatting with the people who are implementing them across the state.
We're very excited to welcome our own Stephanie DeLano, Director of DOT's Environmental Science Bureau with the Office of Environment, and Chris Standley, Environmental Specialist with the Office of Environment. Welcome, Stephanie and Chris.
Thank
you
guys.
so much for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
So we want to learn a little bit about you guys. Please share a bit about your roles here at DOT. Stephanie.
So I am, as you said, I'm the director of the Environmental Science Bureau. And what that means is that I deal with policy guidance, planning, and programmatic issues related to environmental facets of transportation. I work in the main office, and we have staff that deals with a number of different environmental specialties, and we help out the regions with project development as well.
So what about your background? What's your background?
I am a jack of all trades, but I do have a bachelor's in environmental science and African studies and a master's in natural resource planning and policy.
And how long have you been with DOT?
19 years this May. It's been a long time.
Congratulations.
Yes. And before that, I did transportation and environmental consulting in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, very interesting.
Chris, tell us about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm a wildlife biologist at NISTOT. I've been here for about 7 years. It's my 7th year at NISTOT, and I really enjoy being here. I work on a number of initiatives, but my primary focus has been wildlife passage, and that's been since 5 years into the position. So it's really something I care a lot about. I think that this really benefits a lot of our citizens in New York State. And we really do have a large effort carried out by a number of talented regional staff and outside and internal partners on multidisciplinary teams. So,
well, let's get to the basics here. What exactly is a wildlife crossing? What does that mean?
It's really a simple concept. It's just passing wildlife over the road or under the road. It's essentially a crossing like you would use, like pedestrians would use. It's just getting wildlife away from the road and beyond it.
And obviously, anyone who's driven, especially when we're talking about up in the Adirondack Park or really anywhere, I mean, you're always keeping an eye out for wildlife, for wildlife large and small, and talk about for safety, but for the safety of the animals, also for the safety of the traveling public as well. When these roads are being built, they're oftentimes going through habitats, and these are places that these animals probably just have migrated for millennia. So it's something that obviously needs to be taken into account. Now, how are you able to, figure out where these need to be and what is going to be crossing? Talk about kind of the process that goes into figuring out, like, okay, we need this here for this particular species or these particular animals.
Well, I'll say that there's a number of different things that happen. So we do have wildlife crossing, and as you said, Josh, there's a couple different reasons why we concentrate on that crossing at that location. And it's not just crossings, it's a variety of different kinds of wildlife infrastructure that might happen. And some of that might even be barriers to avoid wildlife vehicle collisions and point them towards safer places to crossing. But so we have both the needs for connecting habitats, connecting different tracts of habitat, large masses of habitat, and also trying to reduce road mortality. So we don't want there to be hits, but we also want the wildlife to feel like they can cross from one side to the other and not turn around. There's a lot of literature on what might make a variety of different kinds of animals turn around instead of keep going.
We're going to show a lot of pictures on social media about what these look like, but for those who can't see them, describe what they look like. Like sometimes it's just rocks, like small rocks, or just an easier passage underneath a bridge. It could be a culvert. Talk about the different methods here that are implemented when you've got, maybe you're going over water, or what these crossings are like.
Yeah, so the concept really is simple. It's either over or under the road, right? So you could use an existing culvert, and you could hang a shelf on that culvert and let wildlife walk on that shelf.
Like it actually hangs on the inside?
Absolutely, yeah. We have a project that we've shown you guys in the past in Region 2, which is a really neat example, and that'll be at the State Fair.
It's a good point, because this is coming out right before the State Fair happens. You mentioned we'll have pictures online, and we'll obviously have some descriptions and pictures and parts of the description for this episode, but go to the fair. One of our exhibits there will actually be a model of a culvert that's, I believe, cut in half, kind of getting the cross section of it, where you can see, where these animals might pass. So definitely make sure to, if you're heading down to the fair, and I imagine that you are, we'll be there.
Yeah.
But head on down there and check it out. It really is something cool. So sorry to interject there, Chris, but I want to make sure people know that they can actually go out and see it and see exactly what these things really are.
That's great. I appreciate that. There's like I said, the concept is very, very simple. You can put simple trails underneath the bridge on either side of the riverbanks. If we build our bridges in a way that accommodates those riverbanks to remain where they are, and we're not, looking at a really steep concrete shelf instead. So it's really, we don't have a lot of examples of overpass designs, which would essentially be a bridge going over the road.
So maybe helping them get under the roadway is more desirable?
There's a lot of opportunities for that, because we already have the infrastructure in place that we could modify slightly to make that happen. I think doing an overpass requires a little more specialty in application. I'm not saying it isn't possible. It definitely is. It just seems to be a lower hanging fruit to go with the underpasses.
How long have you guys been working on this? How long has this program been going on?
So in its current iteration, probably about 5 years. But this is not the first time DOT has been looking to pass wildlife more safely. I believe that there have been previous kind of fits and starts to this, where we have worked with outside agencies, we've worked with DEC, we've worked with NGOs on specific design ideas, and the replica of the crossing that we actually will have at the fair is, I believe, about 10 years old at this point in time. I'd have to double check that date. But it showed us, and it showed DOT more broadly, what are some of the kind of things that we can accomplish. So that shelf, it was retrofitted into an existing culvert. That is one thing. As we talked about, there's also, when we are rebuilding our bridges or large culverts, we can also add, whether it is stone, dirt, or even grass, depending on how much sunlight is penetrating, we can add some riparian areas along the riverbank to continue through.
What does riparian area mean?
So, I'm not going to be able to define this correctly, but I'll say that a riparian area generally is the riverside. So that is kind of a complex makeup of the soil, of the grading, and of the vegetation. And so when we talk about having like a riparian buffer, that's an area in which the stream can move in its natural sinuation, and where the animals and vegetation kind of all come together at the riverside, at the stream side. So a lot of our structures that are carrying roads over rivers, we might sometimes build small and pinch the river and allow for the water to go through, but not carry on all of those great ecosystems that are coming along the river. So when we talk about carrying through the riparian area, we are basically talking about bridging over without constraining.
Okay.
So
Nice.
you mentioned that, obviously you're doing this with things that currently exist, but also when things are being redesigned and rebuilt. When that's happening, how involved is your team in saying like, hey, we're doing work on this now, since we're already doing work on it, let's, incorporate some of these ideas, some of these, plans. How does that work from your guys' standpoint of, we're already doing work, we might as well, take advantage of that and do this at the same time?
I think Steph has more experience in this conversation than I do, but I would say that, the key component of this is to engage our design teams at pre-scoping and scoping, because coming to them at final design is not a good approach, right? They've already had everything done at that point, and we don't want to surprise them. And it can be very straightforward. Like Stephanie said, it's simply preserving the riverbanks underneath the bridge so that you can put a small trail in. It's really not rocket science. Steph, I think you should probably speak to more of the conversations that you've been having with structures.
Sure. So when a bridge replacement is being planned early on, cost and size are part of that early discussion. How much is this going to cost? And we figure out how much it's going to cost in part based on what size we think it'll be. So having the discussions early on with the hydraulic engineers and with the structures designers, our awesome team of bridge designers, early on about what can be done to accommodate wildlife within our road and transportation infrastructure is really important. Regional, environmental, and landscape architect staff get involved early on, and they need to have those discussions about what makes sense for the specific context of that stream, of that crossing area. And so we have been working at main office with an interdisciplinary team discussing how we can better incorporate and have a more practical knowledge and a time frame associated with incorporating these various kinds of accommodations. So that is happening at the main office, but it's also happening in the regions between regional staff while they're talking about design, when they're trying to figure out what's going on in the area before we start designing anything. Part of that is going to and will continue to include both terrestrial, land-based, and aquatic organisms.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, I think, in a lot of our projects, and we see like how things are being used. I understand that you have lots of pictures, like trail cam pictures of actual use by various animals. Some of them were remarkable to me in because I've seen a few of these where turtles are actually using some of like a shelf because I don't know, they prefer to walk under a bridge than swim. I mean, how are you knowing what and like who's using this and how much these structures are being used?
Sure. I mean, I'll start this and I'll turn it over to our wildlife biologist in the room. But Josh had asked earlier, how do you decide where to put these things? So it's not going to be appropriate at every single structure in the state. But when we know early on that there is a rare or endangered species in the area, we're going to have a renewed focus on that. And sometimes we can see when you go out there and take a look again at the context, because we're doing that for a variety of different environmental topics, and you see tracks in the sand and you see, evidence of wildlife passage in the current structure, you have to kind of think about how will that happen in our future structure as well. So we have a couple different ways that might come up. And then we also have evidence of road mortality in certain areas. And so we know that there is passage happening that is not successful. There are tries, and animals and turtles or a variety of different animals might be getting hit. And that's where we might look a little bit closer and see what's going on in the area as a whole, and specifically nearby that structure.
And what have you learned, Chris, when looking at all these things?
Well, I could go back to the question you originally asked, which is how do you know how to get wildlife to move through these structures? I mean, that's really my shtick. Some of the things that we know as wildlife biologists are, okay, there's form meets function, right? And that's true for engineering too. And if we look at riprap under a bridge and we look at
Riprap is
large boulders that armor the bridge bank.
Angular.
Yes, thank you. Angular boulders that armor the riverbanks beneath the bridge so it doesn't wash out from scouring.
right. That could be hard for animals, right?
Especially cervids. Cervids are deer, moose, things with hooves.
little.
So
like,
if they were to look at that.
slender legs.
Yes,
feet, arms,
very
stuff like that.
slippery. I mean, when a deer comes out on the roadway and it steps on pavement, we have, like think of a dog. It has pads on its feet. It's built to run. A deer is also built to run, but not on a slick surface. So it's almost like stepping out on ice for them. Similarly, if you were to step out and try to navigate or walk across a boulder field as a white-tailed deer or a moose, you're just not going to try it because you know better. You can break your ankle and that could be lethal for you.
Yeah.
So we know as biologists what animals can handle as far as traversing certain environments. And we can look at that and critically evaluate it. And like Stephanie said, we do have wildlife vehicle collision data sets. So we can look at those data sets out of, the natural environment and just say, okay, where are we striking things and what are we striking? And those data are limited. But we do have staff that also go out and measure these things. They'll look at the roadside and say, wow, we heard a public complaint that there's a lot of turtles being struck. Let's go look at this. And regional staff and main office staff will go look. And sure enough, if they find, oh, geez, there's been like 50 turtles carcasses piled up in this corridor that's a mile and a half long, that's a really good indication that we have a problem. And we can then take that and evaluate what's the solution. How do we get these turtles safely under the roadside without being struck? And I really come in for a lot of the landscape architects and engineers and folks that are not wildlife centered and understanding why are we striking 150 turtles a year at this location? And it's like, well, there's gravel beds on each side of the road that we've put in place for good drainage and to have that road bed secure and stable. Well, that's great nesting habitat for turtles. So they're coming out of the wetlands and they're trying to dig into the roadside, and they might dig in one hole and say, okay, I've tested this. It's not quite what I wanted, but maybe on the other side of the road, there's something good that I want to dig into and nest in.
So you got to think
they
like a
cross the road.
turtle.
Correct.
Yeah, you got to
Yes.
think like the wildlife that we're trying to protect.
Yes, and if you're a turtle and you're walking the speed that turtles walk, which is pretty slow, and you have a car traveling at 45 miles an
Yeah.
hour, and
gonna
maybe
win.
the traffic volume is, 1,200 vehicles an hour there, the likelihood that you get struck is pretty high.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I'll throw this to you. I want to talk about partnership because these things don't happen in a vacuum. Who does DOT work with, when trying to further an effort like this?
So we work with a lot of different agencies. We work with a lot of different states as well. So there is a great community of scientists, environmental professionals, engineers in the Northeast, and really around the country. And I'll say the Western states are ahead of us in terms of a lot of ways of wildlife passage. They have bigger herds of things moving. But so we learn from them. We have our AASHTO working group of other state highway traffic organizations that we learn from, that we have regular meetings with. We also have the Staying Connected Initiative, which is a collection of scientists, nonprofit organizations, and state and municipal partners that all work together to talk about wildlife passage, habitat connectivity issues. And then we have, in our own backyard, we have folks like the Nature Conservancy, and specifically the Adirondack branch of the Nature Conservancy, that have worked with us a lot on identifying specific areas and putting together, for instance, that retrofit in the Utica area of the Adirondacks, our Region 2, that the specific state fair exhibit is based on. So they are working with us. The Northeast Transportation Wildlife Collaborative, which is just for Northeast states, and we get input from a lot of different folks on that. So that's how we learn and we grow. And sometimes we can get together and accomplish some great stuff.
Speaking of learning and growing from what we do know, these wildlife crossings are also meant to protect the traveling public, as we discussed a bit earlier. What kind of statistics do you have right now that we can point to as DOT and say, hey, these are really working for all of us?
There's a lot of statistics that we can cite. So we know how important roadways are for our daily lives, and they really are an extensive network throughout the landscape. And it's great for our convenience and what we need for our economies and just daily life. It's not so great for wildlife. That's a really hard thing to navigate on the landscape. And what that results in is, and this is, I would argue, largely underestimated, but New York State citizens strike about 70,000 white-tailed deer annually.
Whoa.
So 70,000, and each one of those strikes is estimated somewhere between $4,000 to $19,000. So what that translates to is 70,000 times whichever metric that these researchers have come up with, and some are different numbers than others for, including different metrics, like the cost of the animal, the property damage that was inflicted, whether there's an injury or fatality, human or otherwise. And that's billions of dollars, and for New York State alone, it's about $1 billion a year, we estimate, that we expend alone.
So the insurance agencies are the ones that are collecting a lot of this data on cost. That's where we're getting it from. And there are, as Chris said, we think it's a bit underestimated because a lot of times people might strike an animal and not report it to insurance.
The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety estimates that nationally we average 200 deaths per year from wildlife vehicle collisions. And in New York State alone, from 2014 to 2023, we've suffered 55 deaths from wildlife vehicle collisions.
I will say that in New York, we do have camera monitoring at some of these wildlife passage places that we've put in. And so we have examples of the wildlife using the bridge. So instead of going up and over, they're using it. So you can't say a one-on-one that raccoon, that deer, that fox would have been hit, but I can tell you that they are being used.
And there are studies where they're citing 75 to 95% reductions in wildlife vehicle collisions, and they're measuring pre-construction versus post-construction. So that's a pretty solid metric.
So that's a good indicator that these are working.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I certainly want to thank both our guests, Stephanie and Chris, for taking some time to chat with us. And a reminder, again, listeners, you can get a firsthand look at how these crossings work. If you're heading to the Great New York State Fair in Syracuse, DOT has all kinds of displays and exhibits and activities. But in the Science and Industry Building on the fairgrounds, Stephanie, you may actually be able to meet Stephanie DeLano, which is, that's reason enough to go. But if not...
It's very exciting.
If not that, then you can certainly get a chance to see one of these wildlife crossings, which is really a really cool thing to see. So certainly, if you're heading to the fair, head on down to take a look at that. But again, both of you, thank you for taking some time to sit and chat with us and tell us more about this. But also thank you for the work you guys are doing to help protect these animals and help protect the roadways for the drivers as well. So thank you both so very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
for having us.
Well, that will just do it for us here from the DOT POD. Thanks to everyone for listening, wherever and however you may be doing so. Anya, good one here today, an interesting one here today.
Definitely. Next time I'm driving over a bridge or I see a culvert, I'm going to be thinking about animals maybe going underneath there, maybe,
Absolutely. We are not alone in this world, that's for sure.
We're not alone in this world, and maybe they're seeking safe passage.
I hope so. So thanks again for tuning in. You can reach out to us, podcast at dot.ny.gov. It's the easiest way to do it. It's podcast at dot.ny.gov. So she's Anya, I'm Josh. Until next time, we'll be right here on the DOT POD.